She stood on the riverbank, heart pounding, eyes locked on a basket floating down the Nile. Not just any basket, but the last thread of hope for her baby brother. In a world ruled by fear and death, one little girl chose to believe in promises rather than pain. Welcome to Biblical Stories, where ancient lives speak to modern hearts. Here, we uncover the hidden strength, deep emotions, and divine purposes behind every name in Scripture. Subscribe and discover the soul behind every story.
The sun burned high over Egypt, casting golden light on the reeds that swayed along the Nile, and there, half hidden by the rushes, stood a young girl named Miriam, silent but not still, alert with a fire that belied her years, watching over a tiny basket that cradled her newborn brother, the one her family dared to save when all hope had been outlawed, her breath caught with every ripple in the water, her mind racing with what might happen next, and yet she stayed, rooted in faith, because someone had to stand guard over the promise, over the dream, over the future that floated toward danger and destiny, and though she was young, she understood what was at stake, not just for her family, but for an entire people, and in that moment, she became more than a sister, she became a witness to God's unfolding plan. No one talks about how brave she was, how the heat of Pharaoh's threat didn't melt her courage, how she stood when most would flee, how a child became the first guardian of a deliverer, and not by chance but by calling. Because faith doesn't ask your age, it asks your heart, and Miriam's heart was all in, all faith, all fierce love, and the silence around her wasn't fear. It was focus, like a soldier waiting for the signal to move, her young hands clenched at her sides. Not to hold back tears, but to hold on to courage, and when the daughter of Pharaoh appeared, glittering like power and perfume, Miriam's instincts burned like a spark. She stepped forward not with trembling but with wisdom, because the God who wrote promises in stars also whispered them to little girls in whispers of hope and fire. "Shall I get a Hebrew woman to nurse the baby for you?" she asked, her voice calm and careful, but her eyes shining with a hope too big to hide, and just like that, destiny turned in her favor, because Miriam didn't wait for a miracle. She walked into one, she spoke into one, she risked everything on one question that could have ended in punishment but opened the door to protection, restoration, and reunion, and the princess said yes. And her mother, the baby's real mother, was called, and what was once torn apart by tyranny was bound together by faith and boldness and the kind of courage only love can fuel, and in that moment, Miriam saw something most people miss. God moves through those who move in faith, even when they're small, even when they're overlooked, even when the world says stay silent, she spoke. The years passed and the boy grew, and so did Miriam's strength, her voice, her vision. She was no longer just the girl by the river, she became the woman who sang by the sea, who led other women in dance and deliverance, but those moments of glory were rooted in years of obscurity, of watching, of waiting, of trusting. Because faith doesn't bloom overnight, it deepens in silence, in sacrifice, in the little choices that no one sees. And Miriam's journey reminds us that leadership begins in the shadows, not on stages, and that real strength isn't loud, it's loyal, it's quiet endurance, it's staying by the water when everyone else walks away, believing that what God starts, He finishes. When Israel crossed the Red Sea and Pharaoh's army drowned behind them, it wasn't Moses who led the first song, it was Miriam, the prophetess, tambourine in hand, joy in every step, calling others to praise the God who keeps His word, and her voice wasn't just music, it was memory, it was history, it was a fire lit from the first time she stood on a riverbank watching her brother drift into danger, and now, years later, she danced because she saw what faith becomes when it grows, and that's what makes her story powerful, not just the beginning or the ending, but the through line of relentless belief, the refusal to bow to fear, the choice to be present even when powerless, because God uses those who show up again and again and again. But her journey wasn't perfect, and that's why it matters even more, because there came a moment when her voice turned from praise to protest, when jealousy clouded her heart and she questioned Moses' leadership, forgetting the same God who had chosen her brother had also chosen her, and in that moment of pride, she stumbled, she faltered, and she was struck with leprosy. Not as punishment but as a pause, a divine correction, a reminder that leadership isn't entitlement, it's humility, and even the strongest fall when they forget their source, but what's beautiful is what happened next. Moses prayed, and God healed her, because grace doesn't abandon those who fall, it lifts them when they're ready to learn again. And that's why Miriam's story speaks so loudly today, because she was not flawless, she was faithful, and when she failed, she returned. Not with pride but with presence, and she kept walking with her people, kept trusting the same God who had carried her from riverbank to wilderness, from tambourine to tears, and in every stage, she was real, she was bold, she was needed, and maybe that's what we all need to remember. That God doesn't use us because we're perfect, but because we're willing. Because we're present, because we keep showing up even after we've fallen, and Miriam showed up, again and again, in storms and songs, in silence and leadership. Because the promise wasn't just about Moses, it was also about her. She saw what others missed, the thread of hope weaving through oppression, the quiet miracles that looked like coincidence, the divine strategy hidden in fragile things, and she dared to believe that God's hand could guide even a basket on a river, that even a girl too young to lead could be a spark in the dark, a guardian of something bigger than herself, and maybe that's the heart of her story. Being small but seeing big, being ordinary but acting brave. Being a sister but dreaming prophet, and even when no one remembered her name, heaven did, because heaven writes stories in hidden places, and Miriam's story was written in water, in waiting, in worship, and in the wild grace of a God who calls little girls to do great things. So when you think you're too small, too quiet, too overlooked to matter, remember Miriam, the girl who watched over a promise, the woman who danced in deliverance, the leader who stumbled but stood again, and know this. You don't need a title to be powerful, you don't need an audience to be anointed, you don't need to be loud to be heard by heaven, because God sees your quiet faith, your silent tears, your fierce loyalty. And He writes stories through people just like you, the watchers, the waiters, the bold believers who hold the thread of hope when everything seems lost, and if you're standing at the edge of something uncertain, don't look away, watch, wait, trust. Her legacy is not a statue or a scroll. It's the echo of courage in the face of chaos, the sound of praise after pain, the steady faith in the background of a bigger story, and maybe that's what makes Miriam unforgettable, not just what she did but what she saw, and how she stayed, and how she trusted that even rivers obey the God of redemption, and if you feel unseen, unheard, unimportant, Miriam says otherwise, because heaven hears your whispers, honors your watching, and transforms your waiting into something holy, something eternal, something powerful, and that's where we'll pause for now, but not end, because Miriam's voice still echoes, calling us to watch, to wait, and to believe.
If you are enjoying this video, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to help this channel reach more people. Now let's continue.
Years after the Red Sea split and the desert became their classroom, Miriam continued to walk among her people, not as a queen, not as a priest, but as a voice of memory, a reminder that deliverance has a beginning and a cost, that promises are not just made, they are kept, nurtured, and watched over, and even though the wilderness was dry and harsh, Miriam had already known the ache of waiting, the sting of injustice, the patience it takes to carry a calling, and she carried it still, though the lines on her face deepened and the ones around her changed, because when God gives you a promise to protect, it doesn't fade with time, it burns brighter, deeper, stronger, and Miriam became a mother to a nation, not through birth but through belief, not through position but through presence. And yet, even the strongest grow weary, and Miriam wasn't immune to disappointment. There were days when the people she led forgot the miracles, forgot the melodies, forgot the river and the rescue and the reason they were free, and on those days, maybe she stood at the edge of the desert remembering the edge of the Nile and wondered if anything had really changed, but then a child would ask her to sing again, and she would smile, and she would remember. The faithfulness of God is not undone by forgetful hearts, and her story wasn't written to be celebrated but to be lived, passed down like a torch, a rhythm, a song in the bones of a generation, and every time she sang, she reminded them, He is the God who sees, the God who saves, the God who keeps His word. Miriam's life was not a straight path, it curved through courage and correction, through harmony and hardship, and that's what makes her real, relatable, because she knew what it meant to be celebrated one day and silenced the next, to feel the fire of leadership and the chill of isolation, and still she walked, still she watched, still she waited, because faith doesn't require clarity, it requires trust, and she trusted the one who had saved her brother from drowning, who had split the sea with wind and wonder, who had spoken in fire and cloud, and in every step of the journey, she carried a quiet knowing that obedience isn't always loud, that legacy is often sown in tears, and that some of the most powerful stories are lived offstage. As the years wore on, Miriam's story faded from the scrolls but not from heaven, and when her time came to leave this earth, the people stopped, the nation paused, the desert held its breath, because one of the first flames had gone out, and they buried her not in a temple or palace, but in the wilderness where she had walked, where she had waited, where she had watched God move. And that place became holy not because of gold or glory but because Miriam had walked there, faithfully, fiercely, fearlessly, and her memory became part of the land, part of the dust that carried the echo of her songs, and maybe that's all we really want, to live a life that leaves a sound behind, a scent of courage, a legacy of belief. Today, her story still floats like that tiny basket on the river, quiet, almost forgotten, but powerful, carried by the current of time, calling to those who feel invisible, reminding the watchers, the waiters, the protectors of promises that your role matters, even when no one claps, even when the spotlight shines elsewhere, because God writes the world's biggest stories through the smallest steps, and your faith, like Miriam's, might be the bridge between the broken and the breakthrough, the silent moment that shifts everything, the quiet courage that makes way for deliverance. So stand still if you must, speak up when you can, and stay faithful always, for you may be watching over something sacred. She didn't part the sea, but she parted the fear that surrounded her family. She didn't carry tablets of stone, but she carried the memory of mercy and miracle. She didn't lead with laws, but with love, and that is leadership too, the kind that heals, the kind that holds, the kind that endures, and in every household where a woman waits in prayer, or a sister stays by a brother's side, or a daughter dreams beyond what the world allows, Miriam lives again, not as a distant name but as a near reminder that God partners with the patient, the persistent, the present-hearted, and through them, He brings freedom in ways the world never expects. If you've ever been the one to believe when others doubt, to protect when others flee, to sing when others cry, then you carry Miriam's spirit too, and though no one may write your name in a scroll or sing your song in a crowd, heaven knows, heaven records, heaven responds, and your faith is not forgotten, your tears are not wasted, and your waiting is not in vain, because every promise God makes is a story in motion. And sometimes He chooses a girl by a river to keep it alive, and sometimes He chooses you, right where you are, in the middle of the ordinary, to guard something extraordinary. So let her story not just inspire you, but awaken you, because there are promises in your life right now, floating in fragile baskets of hope, and you are being called to watch, to wait, to act in faith, even when no one sees, and it may not look like glory, it may not feel like greatness, but it is holy ground when you stand in trust, and if you're wondering what God is doing in the silence, remember Miriam. Because He's preparing the way through your watching, He's building strength through your stillness, His unfolding deliverance through your obedience, and when the time comes, you too will rise and dance by the waters of freedom. She was just a girl, but not just anything, because there is no just in the kingdom of God, and every child who watches, every sister who prays, every woman who holds a dream in the face of danger carries something sacred, something eternal, and if you carry that today, hold it with reverence, speak when prompted, trust when tested, and know that your story is being woven into something divine, and one day, someone will look back on your faith and find courage. Someone will hear your song and remember hope, someone will read your name and rise to their calling, because that's how legacy works, it multiplies in the hearts of those who dare to believe.
Thank you for walking through Miriam's story with us today. If it touched you, share it with someone who needs a reminder that faith begins in small moments and grows into eternal impact. Subscribe to Biblical Stories for more voices like Miriam's, voices of courage, of waiting, of breakthrough. Your story matters too. And here we honor them all, one promise at a time.